And with that, I want to now introduce our wonderful moderator for today, David Waddell, who is our communications officer from the Pacific Data Hub team and the corporate communications team here at SPC. So thank you, David. Over to you.
Thanks so much, CEO, and welcome and thank you for joining us, everybody. To begin today's Talanoa, we're going to kick off with a Slido with a couple of questions. If you've not used Slido before, please go to either slido.com on in a browser on your phone or on your computer and use the code Pacific Data, or scan the QR code in front of you, which will take you to the Slido polls. There's two questions that we'll be asking today. The first question is, where are you connecting from? And we'll see the results as they come in. Someone's at their desk, which is good. American Samoa, we've got Canada, New Caledonia, Switzerland, Fiji, Canada, Vanuatu. It's great to see that there's people from all over the world that have been able to join us today. Our next Slido question relates to the topic under discussion today. What is the most important enabler for supporting the development and acceleration of digital trade and e-commerce in the Pacific? In your opinion, what do you think that would be? Accessibility, better statistics, logistics and formalization of economy, transparency, leadership. Oh, infrastructure's got a big kick. Skills and capacity, systems development. And transparency. Digital infrastructure, systems development. Infrastructure still leading. I think a lot of our speakers today will be touching on quite a number of these points: digital payments, equity, prioritization. Well, there's some great answers there. Thank you for participating in the Slido poll. I think we'll begin the Talanoa this morning. I'd like firstly to invite Mr. Choborn Fredrickson, who is the head of e-commerce and digital economy branch at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, to provide some additional opening remarks. Over to you, Choborn.
Thank you very much, David, and good morning to all of you. And we bring some greetings from Geneva in Switzerland. And we're far behind the Pacific. We're still in Thursday, but we're trying to catch up as quickly as we can. Let me start also on behalf of UNCTAD to welcome you all to this Talanoa session on the role of data and statistics in the digital economy. Even though still at an early stage, the use of digital technologies in trade and economic activities, which what we call the digital economy, is growing rapidly in the Pacific. Across the region, people and businesses are increasingly using digital tools to communicate, to expand into new markets, develop new services, export, and pay for goods and services. And the COVID-19 pandemic, as was mentioned already, has further catalyzed digitalization, as it has allowed for some continuity and some resilience despite the many restrictions for social meetings and so on. At the same time, it has highlighted the significant gaps that exist in digital readiness in many developing countries. Moreover, the economies of many small island developing states, including in the Pacific, depend heavily on services which are increasingly delivered or facilitated through digital technologies. The pandemic has also shown that digital data are increasingly important as an economic and strategic resource for both countries and businesses. Data gathering, data analysis, and data sharing have been critical to understanding the health and social challenges during the pandemic, to identify responses, to develop vaccines at record speed, and to trace the virus. However, cross-border data flows, control of the main digital platforms, and the ability to reap the benefits of data are highly concentrated. Going forward, the international community will have to find ways to tap into the vast amounts of data for the public good, and Pacific Island states will want to secure more influence on how their data are used. The silver lining to low levels of digital readiness in parts of the Pacific is that the region also has a high potential for growth and improvement. From building up connectivity and digital payment infrastructure to developing local digital skills and content, there is wide scope for action and policies that can lead to inclusive and sustainable digital development. But policies need to be planned, they need to be monitored, and they need to be evaluated, which requires statistics. Unfortunately, the availability of robust comparable statistics on e-commerce and the digital economy remains very limited in the Pacific. To come to informed and evidence-based policies, governments need to know which enterprises are using the internet and what are they doing when they are online, what are the barriers they are confronted with, and how much does the ICT sector contribute to the economy. The need for further research and data collection on the digital economy in the Pacific region has recently been recognized in the regional e-commerce strategy and roadmap, and is an integral part of the Pacific Digital Economy Program, a joint initiative by the UN Capital Development Fund, the UN Development Program, and UNCTAD. This program was launched in September last year and is funded by the government of Australia, and we work also closely with the PIFs. Under the regional strategy, a new data portal has been created, of which I believe we will hear more from the PIFs and from SPC colleagues who have joined the panel. As part of the Pacific Digital Economy Program, UNCTAD is in the process of developing a regional digital economy report, the first edition of which is expected later this year. This report will, among other things, share insights on the latest developments based on available data, and it will also highlight key data gaps that need to be addressed. Already we can see that for many of the key digital economy indicators, recent data are only available for a handful of Pacific countries. Also part of this program is an online training on the production of digital economy statistics that UNCTAD and SPC have organized for national statistical offices in the Pacific. And I would like to express a special welcome to all participants of this course, statisticians from the Pacific community who have joined us for this session today. The training course seeks to strengthen the capacity of national statistical systems in the Pacific to produce more reliable and internationally comparable digital economy statistics, with the ultimate objective to improve policies that promote digital opportunities and support digital entrepreneurship in the respective islands. National statistical offices play a critical role in this process, but they cannot do this alone. They also require active support and involvement from users of these statistics, such as from policymakers in different ministries, central banks, and other stakeholders. For example, for businesses, it's essential to have good access to good statistics in order to plan investments. Before closing, I would like to stress again the importance of data collection for informed policymaking when it comes to e-commerce and the digital economy. Many countries in the Pacific are still at a very early stage when it comes to data collection in this area, and country efforts require both technical assistance from organizations like UNCTAD and SPC and financial support from the donor community. Regional initiatives such as those by the Pacific Data Hub and PIFs play a key role in the collection and sharing of internationally comparable statistics. This is a collective effort that supports the whole Pacific region with a view to promoting a more inclusive digital economy, and which merits a sustained long-term commitment of both the development community and from donors. In closing, I would like to express my great appreciation for the excellent cooperation we have experienced with SPC in preparation for this webinar, as well as for the online training course, which was set up also with the support of colleagues in UNCTAD in the Train for Trade team. The training could also not have taken place without the financial support from the governments of Australia and Sweden. I would also like to thank colleagues and partners of the Pacific Digital Economy Program at UNCDF, UNDP, and PIFs for their continued support. Given the momentum for e-commerce and digitalization in the region, today's dialogue is very timely, and in line with the Talanoa tradition, I am, together with the entire UNCTAD team, looking forward to hearing your stories and participate in a constructive dialogue that can hopefully advance the region collectively and help to bring about the benefits of the digital economy. Thank you very much. Back to you, David.
Thank you very much for those remarks, Jorborn. We have 6 speakers for you today during the Talanoa. And as CEO mentioned, at the end of each presentation, we will have time for questions. So please do place any questions that you have in the chat, or during the Q&A time, please raise your hand to have your microphone unmuted. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Andrea Giacomelli leads the Aid for Trade section of the permanent delegation of the Pacific Islands Forum to the United Nations, World Trade Organization, and other international organizations in Geneva. In his role, Andrea promotes the establishment of regional initiatives in the priority areas of the Pacific Aid for Trade strategy, and assists Forum Island countries individually and collectively to make better use of aid for trade opportunities. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, David, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. I will try now to share my screen. Okay, can you see it, David? Okay. Okay, well, thank you again, and good morning to most of you, good afternoon to a few of you, and good evening to very few of us. Now, my presentation today will mainly focus on the broader initiative, Pacific e-commerce initiative that the PIFs is coordinating, and that is bringing together a number of regional and international stakeholders with the view of trying to accelerate e-commerce development in the region. Since our Talanoa focuses on data, I wanted to start with a quick graph, and probably many of you have already seen this this graphical representation. And the Pacific countries are those small cloud in red, and the rest of the world is the blue one. The green one is the Caribbean region. And on the x-axis, you find the logarithmic expression of the population, whereas on the y-axis, you find the distance weighted on GDP from the main global market. And what you can clearly see from this simple representation is that, the Pacific region is basically the smallest in terms of size and the most isolated region in the world. We are far more small on average, and surely far more isolated than the Caribbean region, the region with which we are normally compared. That means essentially that for the Pacific region, reducing, if you like, the tyranny of distance and pursuing development opportunity that can be less affected by our small size is key to our development. And this is essentially the reason why e-commerce was identified as one of the regional priorities of the Pacific Aid for Trade strategy. E-commerce, in essence, allows businesses to use, if you like, virtual channels to connect with clients and businesses across the globe. And by doing so, obviously, e-commerce reduces the investment costs to start and operate a business. And it also reduces the impediments to growth that are generated by high physical distance with market of destination. In fact, as Torbjörn was referring to before, services. For some services, the tyranny of distance can be completely eliminated through e-commerce. If you think today, a good graphic designer who's maybe residing in a remote Pacific island of the Vanuatu archipelago, if he's well connected, and if that graphic designer had the right skill, through global service platforms, such as, for example, freelancer.com, such designer will be able today to compete on par with residents of global metropolis like Sydney or New York. And so you get, from this simple example, I think we can appreciate what difference can make e-commerce to reduce the structural constraint of a region such as the Pacific. Regional work on e-commerce started in 2017 through a joint workshop that we, the PIFs, conducted together with UNCTAD and the WTO. At that workshop, we decided to adopt the UNCTAD template to undertake harmonized diagnostic studies in the Pacific region. And from 2017 to 2021, we have undertaken 11 of those studies, 11 studies that eventually informed a regional strategy, Pacific regional e-commerce strategy and roadmap, which focuses on priority collective actions that as a region we can pursue to boost e-commerce. And this strategy, which was approved in August 2021 by Forum Island Trade Ministers, proposes 54 priority measures, which are covering the seven policy areas identified by the UNCTAD e-trade assessment methodologies, including e-commerce strategies and policies, ICT infrastructure, payment, logistics, legal and regulatory environment, e-commerce skill development, and access to finance for e-commerce. All these, if you like, diagnostic and strategic path that we at the PIFs conducted together with our partners at UNCTAD and other organizations was concluded towards the end of 2021, and starting from 2022, the focus has now shifted on implementation. An implementation that we are conducting together with a number of partners. If you look at the Pacific e-commerce strategy and roadmap, especially in the roadmap, you will see in a column for each of the 54 measures, specific implementing partners are identified as key implementing agencies to carry out some collective actions on e-commerce. This graphical representation in front of you sums up, if you like, what has been the projects, the main projects that are currently being undertaken in the region under each of the 7 policy areas by the partners which were identified in the e-commerce strategy and roadmap. These projects and this table that I have elaborated is based on the information provided by our partners, information that we are currently being consolidating in the Pacific e-commerce portal, a portal that we are going to be launching soon in June or July this year. Just to provide this list is not exhaustive, but yet provide a good picture that shows definitely the impetus that the approval of the regional e-commerce strategy has given to our collective partnership for e-commerce. For example, UNCTAD is conducting a readiness assessment on cross-border paperless trade in Vanuatu and Tonga with the view of supporting the accession to the framework agreement on cross-border paperless trade in Asia and the Pacific. We have the E-Trade Alliance, which is conducting pilot projects leveraging the capacity of multinationals in the area of trade logistics via DHL and Google, Skills, E-Commerce Institute and DHL, and payment, an initiative from MasterCard that's recently been launched in Fiji in this sense. Pacific, we have also the Pacific PESER Plus implementation unit, which has funded and is conducting the e-commerce assessment on Cook Islands, once again based on our harmonized methodology, and is scoping the possibility to working with the Universal Postal Union to support the e-commerce readiness of our post offices. Then, of course, we have SPC with the current work on statistics that SPC colleagues will elaborate on later. We have the Pacific Trade and Invest, which has developed a comprehensive training and mentoring suite on social media, on utilization of suites like Canva for private businesses, but also the work on e-payment solutions together with partners such as HotelPay and Covina to provide better e-payment solutions for small accommodation. We have then the work of UNCTAD, which is supporting adoption of model legislation in countries such as Fiji, PNG, and Kiribati on electronic signatures, electronic transferable records, and adoption of UN Convention on the use of electronic communication in international contract. And then we have, of course, UNCTAD, that is working on many domains. One of the most important is definitely ASICUDA as the custom electronic system, but also as the basis for the development of electronic single windows. There is work from UNCTAD on legal gap analysis, e-learning on digital statistics, and legal aspects of e-commerce and digital identity. UNCTAD is also conducting Solomon Island National e-commerce strategy, which is still based on the same methodological template that we are all using as part of this partnership. And then finally, there is the UNCDF, which is providing important access to finance to many startups, especially in this very moment, e-commerce platform, with the view of scale up these platforms in different countries, especially Fiji and Samoa, but also to support MSMEs to be onboarded on such platforms. Platforms such as Cyberfood Fiji, Makete Fiji, Skya in Samoa, and the platform for Digicel Tonga are being funded through UNCDF. And finally, there is the PIFS, the organization that I'm representing, which is currently developing as an e-commerce portal, as conducted together with other partners a 2 weeks training on supporting e-commerce negotiations. It is drafting harmonized business toolkits to provide easy support to private sector companies who wish to start their online journey. And also that is currently supporting the development of national e-commerce strategy in Samoa and Tuvalu. As you can see, I think this gives, I think this brief exposition can give you some impression of the momentum, really, that the approval of the strategy has given and the coordinated work that all the partners are doing in their assigned areas. I'll just one of these activities that the PIFS was conducting is this e-commerce portal. E-commerce portal that PIFS conducts because the portal responds to the need of coordinating the Pacific e-commerce initiative. In fact, PIFS' role is not just that of an implementing agency of the strategy, but PIFS has also been given the role of coordinating the broader partnership that has been built around the Pacific e-commerce initiative. And now, coordination needs to happen at many levels. There is the need to coordinate decision making, and in order to do so, we will be establishing a regional e-commerce committee and 2 subcommittees, one from the private sector and one from development partners. But obviously, coordination is also about coordinating the big amount of information provision that is relevant to the topic of e-commerce. Now the e-commerce portal responds to the need to coordinate this provision of information, and therefore the portal will represent the single repository, or the main repository, if you like, for the region on the program and the projects that are being conducted to implement the Pacific e-commerce strategy. It will also be a repository of all the diagnostic studies, strategies, toolkits, and training materials that the partners of the initiative are developing. It will provide simplified and easy access to e-commerce statistics, and will also be a source of a regular update through the release of newsletters and other media releases. The official launch of the portal is likely to happen in June, July 2022, and all of our friends also that are participating today will definitely be invited to join this event. My final slides is about indeed the topic of today, e-commerce statistics. This e-commerce statistics definitely is, like Torbjörn was saying, one of the priorities identified in the e-commerce strategies. The role of statistics is twofold. Statistics support decision-making, especially statistics on the enabling environment, on the enablers of e-commerce. Without knowing the levers to promote e-commerce and what's their level in each country, it is difficult to understand in which area one should act in order to boost e-commerce. But then after you have supported decision-making, you have also to observe the results of those decisions. And for that, of course, data on consumers that are transacting online and businesses that are selling offline are essential. The PIFS, SPC, and UNCTAD have established a partnership, and they're working together to try to fill some of the gaps that exist on statistics. We do have developed this first ever, if you like, regional data set on e-commerce statistics that mostly concern the enabling environment. It is nothing, if you like, new or nothing special. All we have done is basically to consolidate all the various statistics of the enabling environment that are available at different international organizations and put them all under the umbrella of the Pacific Data Hub, and then eventually this to mirror the data from the Pacific Data Hub into the e-commerce portal in order to provide easy access to any stakeholder, to any casual stakeholder, to any official from a country who will want to know in very few seconds what's going on in the different areas that are policy areas of e-commerce. It is nothing major, but it's not even something very minor, because up until today, researching and having a broad picture of what was going on in the Pacific region in the e-commerce enabling environment area was immensely difficult, because somebody would have had to jump from one website to another to consolidate data from for different Pacific Island countries. So sometimes even getting this kind of early harvest can make a big difference from a busy official in the Pacific who maybe needs to provide a quick report to the minister to support a Council of Minister paper and decision in one issue relevant to e-commerce. I think on challenges and solutions that this exercise has comported, I think my colleagues from SPC will report on that later on during their presentation. What I've noticed personally, and I'm not a statistician, is that obviously there are country level gaps also on the enabling environment. For as much as we have tried to be creative in finding out data on online transactions, these are not yet available, and we will have to work on it as a way forward. And one issue that we have in terms of challenges is that at the moment, no long-term financial support is provided, notably to the SPC, to have staff who consistently and on a long term can work on the collection, consolidation, and publication of e-commerce statistics. We have started to work on solution on that, to think about solution. This may involve country level work to fill some of the observed gap. We have thought about undertaking some web crawling or scraping to spot additional data on the web. Pursuing partnership with the private sector to extract or purchase data is another possibility. And finally, the provision of long-term financial support for statistic collection and consolidation and publication, especially to the SPC, is probably one of the most important way forward for serving the Pacific e-commerce initiative. With that, I think I'll close this presentation, and I thank you and give it back to you, David.
Thanks very much for the presentation, Andrea. Just briefly, we've got a question that's come in just asking if there's any examples of statistics on the enabling environment.
Yes, there are a number of them. Just let me pull out what type of statistic we have collected. So currently we have, I think, collected and published 40 indicators, and statistics on the enabling environment are, for example, those on number of secure internet services, number of active mobile money accounts, number of credit card and debit card users is in the area of payment, and then of course the cost of internet connection, cost of data mobile broadband basket for 2 and 5 gigabyte fixed baskets, and so forth. There are also statistics on post, number of express items delivered in each country, domestic services and international services, number of parcels, very important for e-commerce. And then there is also the statistics collected by UNCTAD about the legal environment, so the status of the different laws on e-commerce, status of consumer protection, cybercrime, e-transaction, and privacy laws, and so on. So you will find all this type of information. This information is available already in the SPC Pacific Data Hub, and it will soon, a simplified version will soon be available and consultable in the Pacific e-commerce portal.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the presentation today, Andrea. Moving on with our Talanoa, our next speaker is from the Pacific Data Hub. Dennis Grofill is an advisor in statistical information at the Pacific Data Hub, and Dennis is currently leading the implementation of the PDH.stat statistical database as the one-stop shop for official statistics about the Pacific region. Over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm trying in this presentation to give a brief overview of the Pacific Data Hub .stat application. And I'll also try to illustrate how it has been used in practice for a project related to digital economy, namely the Pacific e-commerce portal Andrea just presented and mentioned in his presentation. So the .stat application is a part of the Pacific Data program. So the PDH is a program that aims to improve access to information resources about the Pacific. Contains a series of deliverables related to outreach, capacity building, communication like this event, but also provides 4 main applications related to data. So there's first a data catalog that is a sort of classical open data registry where a list of documents, data sets, and things like that can be found easily using topical classifications, keyword searches, and things like that. It's another application that is called the Pacific Map that offers map-based visualizations of geospatial and statistical data about the Pacific. Is the PDH.stat application that is the statistical database I'm going to talk about now. And there's a fourth component that is the microdata library that stores microdata and documentation about microdata for preservation purposes and to facilitate microdata access requests. So the PDH.stat application is based on a software it's called the .stat suite that is collaboratively developed by a community of national and international organizations worldwide, and is led by OECD. It is an open source platform that aims to provide efficient means of disseminating statistical data. It's based on global standards. Regarding processes, it is based on the generic statistical business process model, and regarding the format and structure of data, it is based on the global standard SDMX. So one of the key features of this solution is to provide standard access to statistical data. So when data is stored in .stat, you can access it with a graphical user interface available freely on the web. That's called the Data Explorer, where you can view all sorts of predefined tables and also dig a bit deeper into them by filtering, reshaping, and things like that. You can also export data. There are a series of plugins that are available to use the data in data analysis tools such as Excel, Python, Stata, R, or Power BI. And there's also an application programming interface that allows connecting directly the database and supports a machine-to-machine communication of statistical information. So we have a wide range of channels that allows access to statistical data in .stat. It's targeted to different types of users. So usually the basic, I would say, or advanced user that are searching for a particular statistical information can go to the Data Explorer. Data analysts, statisticians, data scientists will usually more go to the plugins with the data analysis software, and then the web developers and IT people will usually go to the API. The strong point in this also is that the same data that's exposed through all channels. So the consistency is built in, and it's always the same version of the data that is exposed at all times. Yeah, regarding the concrete example now in the area of digital economy. So we had a nice collaboration between PIFS and SPC regarding integration of data for the Pacific e-commerce portal, for the statistical section of this portal. So for this project, 14 data sources from 6 agencies have been integrated. There were also some other existing tables with general statistics such as population, GDP, and things like that that were reused. So 6 new tables were created specifically for the project, leading to the provision of the more or less 40 indicators Andrea just mentioned. So I'll very briefly go through this. We have data from UNCTAD, where there's, for example, a series of tables related to trade in ICT goods and services. And the share they represent in the world or the specific Pacific situation about these statistics. Information on cyber law, so the legislation related to e-commerce. From UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, we have a data set on e-government. From the International Telecommunication Union, we have things on digital development and ICT prices. So that is also what Andrea mentioned at the point in his presentation, for example, the price of mobile internet in countries. We have also some data from the Universal Postal Union with some indicators about the development of excuse me, the postal infrastructure. Some data also from IMF on financial access survey, for example, availability of digital payment means. And also some indicators from World Bank, where they have a huge database of indicators on development, and some of them are collected for Pacific countries in the context of this project. So there's a consolidation and a collection of all this information from various providers, and integrated data is reused in the statistical section of the Pacific e-commerce portal. So doing this exercise also showed some challenges that were already mentioned by several speakers in this presentation. So there are, I classified them into 3 categories. So there are challenges regarding data availability. Sometimes data simply don't exist. Sometimes it's there, but the Pacific is not well covered. Gaps in spatial coverage, or yes, not all countries are covered. Data is sometimes too old. We have sometimes some data points, but that are many years old, or we have no time series. We have only one year available, for example, and then we don't always have breakdowns that are necessary. So there's another type of issue that is quite usual, is accessibility of data. So we have issues related to the license, to the fact that data is only available as reports, or that require manually exporting the data and don't allow to have really a bulk export or automatic connection to the databases. Finally, a third category of issues is the issues related to the way data is structured. Sometimes it's not properly structured as a data set. Categories are not coded, or labels are inconsistent, and things like that. So these challenges can be addressed in different ways. For example, data availability can be addressed through statistical program management. I think data providers and data agencies in charge of data collection to collect data that is necessary for different initiatives. Accessibility can be addressed through modernization of statistical dissemination. And finally, data modeling is usually addressed through the setup of data standards and best practices. So some of these issues may seem quite low level, saying that data is not in the good format may seem really a low level operational issue, but I think issues in the 3 categories here are best addressed at higher level through international cooperation and through so data aware strategic planning, taking into account the operational issues that can emerge when we want to consolidate data across organization for the Pacific. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you. Perhaps just one thing I would like to add is that if you want to see what the Pacific Data.stat looks like, I encourage you to go by yourself, see on the web what it looks like at the following address, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any comments or questions on the way it works or on the content. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dennis. We've had a question come in. What can countries or individual countries do to improve the data that's going into the e-commerce portal? You're muted, Dennis.
Excuse me. Yes, so the data that is flowing to the Pacific e-commerce portal through the Pacific Data Hub is collected from the 6 agencies that were shown on the slide. So the data should be updated in these source databases that act as reference version of the information. It's just a copy of what is in these databases. That is a copy with a subset for just the indicators of interest and for the Pacific region that are integrated in the Pacific Data Hub and then accessed in the Pacific e-commerce portal. So it's to be updated in the reference database. That is at the source. So if it's data about, for example, number of post offices, it's managed by the Universal Postal Union. So they are managing this information and collecting from countries. And I guess they send periodically data collection requests and forms to administrations in different countries. So it follows the usual process. There is no additional data collection process from countries for this. It's just a reuse of what is available.
Great, thanks so much, Dennis. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Scarlett von der Giel. Scarlett is an economics affairs advisor in the e-commerce and digital economy branch division on technology and logistics at UNCTAD, who produced the Digital Economy Report every 2 years. And this flagship report examines how the digital economy contributes to sustainable international trade and development. And as part of the digital economy policy research section, Scarlett helps countries develop statistics on these issues with a view to improving the evidence base for digital economy policy. Over to you, Scarlett.
Thank you very much, David. So I'm going to share my screen as well. Let me know if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it, Scarlett.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to thank you for mentioning the Digital Economy Report, because that's actually how I'm going to start this this presentation, because the subject of the Digital Economy Report 2021 was precisely data and what does it mean for trade and sustainable development. In this case, we're going to start with looking at some of the big picture issues that were presented in the Digital Economy Report that are relevant for all developing countries, and so also for the Pacific region. So why is the issue of data an economic development issue? So the big picture in the report, which, by the way, I invite you to peruse at your, because it's very dense in terms of information, but extremely interesting. So I invite you all to read leisurely through it, take it to bed to read before sleeping. And it examines the implications of growing cross-border data flows, especially for developing countries. It reframes the international policy debate, or attempts to reframe it, to build multilateral consensus. And by multilateral, it means not only intergovernmental, it also means including private sector, which is the leading actor currently in the digital economy. It means involving civil society, which has concerns in terms of how technologies are affecting our daily lives. And it involves an equal voice for all countries, not only those that have sort of the monopoly on the data market, but even the small countries like Pacific Island states. The Digital Economy Report aims at a more equitable distribution of the gains from data flows. And it proposes a new path for data and digital governance, crossing our fingers that it will be heard, because of course, it's up to member states to pick up that recommendation and consider whether it's useful, relevant, and timely. But it is a proposal that would ensure an international data governance framework that would give equal voice to developing countries, and will look at data in terms of harnessing it to create digital public goods. The overview that the report makes of the data-driven digital economy will be no surprise to you, is that it has been rapidly evolving, especially in the past few years, and with the onset of COVID, because it sort of forced digitalization on the whole world, whether we liked it or not. And in fact, global internet traffic in 2022 overcame the whole of internet traffic from its beginning up to 2016. So the volumes of data that have been flowing around the world have increased exponentially. And you ask, well, what does that mean for trade and development? We're going to see that right now. First of all, if you take a look at the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that this international bandwidth and data flows is geographically concentrated along two main routes, with the European market as one entity, China and North America. But in North America, mainly the United States. So the rest of the world is very, very much behind and more than secondary in this current picture of the data market. I'm waiting for the screen to change. Okay, there. So what are the implications for development? I'm not going to go to elaborate too much on this, because there's a very good analysis of this in the digital economy report. Suffice to say that data have many dimensions. It's not only an economic dimension, though that's the one that concerns us the most right now. There is social value to data, there is private value to data, and then the economic dimension of human rights and security concerns. And we are also trying to figure out how to measure data flows from the statistical and economist point of view, because cross-border data flows are not necessarily trade. They shouldn't be considered trade just in terms of raw data, but we have to keep working to try and better define what data flows can be measured and should be measured. And what is the value? How are we going to measure their value? Let's move on. The one thing that's clear is that just like there is a digital divide between countries, there is a data divide in terms of the levels of readiness of countries to harness this data, to produce economic value from this data. Now, I don't know why this is not out there. So, like I said, not all data is created equal. Not all data has value or has the same value for different people. And the digital economy report talks about a data pyramid, which statisticians will recognize, because it's a little bit like what happens with statistics. We have raw data at the very bottom, which is the basis of everything we'll be doing. but they're just data points, and you have to interpret it. You have to consider it as information, ascribe it to a data set, or try to use it to answer a specific question in order for it to acquire some value. Otherwise, it's just a meaningless data point. Now, what happens when you look at data informing at a data set? You might acquire some knowledge. You might realize there are certain trends, certain patterns. And once you realize that and you make an interpretation of data is when you have wisdom, or what we would call data intelligence. And the difference between raw data and data products is critical. It's a little bit, for statisticians, the difference between the data you collect, the raw data you collect, and the final number you publish as an indicator. And as I mentioned before, there is a concentration in terms of the harnessing of data in the world right now. No surprise, it's the United States and China, because they host the largest digital platforms that control all stages of the global data value chain. So as I mentioned, data are not statistics, but Pacific countries provide data to these global digital platforms, although they do not produce data intelligence. Hopefully the Pacific Data Hub is a step towards solving that issue, where data are gathered, but they are also used as a point of information to harness lessons or gain insights in terms of the development of the digital economy in the Pacific. Now, Pacific countries, unfortunately, have no survey-based official statistics. Andrea talked about and also we just heard from the Pacific Data Hub, the kind of statistics that we have that are related to the digital economy from the Pacific, but they are either on the enabling environment, which is to say availability of legislation on e-commerce, for example, or the imports and exports on ICT goods and services, but there is very, very, very little survey-based statistics on the use of ICT by businesses, on e-commerce itself, not on the enabling environment, but on the volume, value, direction of e-commerce, on the ICT sector in terms of how much does it contribute to the economy. And also, Pacific countries are limited in their ability to harness their own data and to produce digital economy statistics by limitations in infrastructure, the tyranny of distance that Andrea mentioned before, and also resources and skills. So where are we right now? We know that data has become increasingly important as an economic and strategic resource, and COVID-19 reinforced that. We acknowledge that digitalization has accelerated, especially in the past 5 years, that it has become unavoidable, especially like it was said, for Pacific countries to overcome their geographical limitation. The digital economy in general is increasingly data-driven, and the data divide compounds the digital divide. And what the Digital Economy Report says is that we need data governance at the international level, but there should also be data governance measures at the national level, at the regional level. And there's a need for statistics to guide Pacific digital economy policy. So that's where we are, and where is it that we want to go? What does inclusive access to the benefits of data for the digital economy look like? This is explained in, this is too much text in this slide, and I apologize, but you can take a look at these principles in terms of what an ideal data governance environment would look like. It would mean that data are harnessed and managed in a way that is inclusive, that it helps people and the planet. It's not only in the service of economics, but in the service of sustainability and well-being, and also of reducing inequalities. The key data-related policy areas are listed on the right-hand side. So there is, and statisticians will recognize some of these issues because they are common also to the ability to produce statistics in the digital economy. We have to have agreed definitions and taxonomies. We have to establish terms of access to data. We have to explore, here it says explore emerging forms of data governance. It's data management, basically. So define what proper data management should look like. What are the rights and principles? Who has access and why and for what? We have to develop standards, and we have to continue and increase international cooperation on platform governance and also on data governance and statistics. So where do we want to go? We want to have official statistics from the Pacific region on the use of ICT by businesses, on the contribution of digitally deliverable services and the ICT sector to GDP, to trade, and to employment. And I use this convoluted phrasing, digitally deliverable services, because as we know, the Pacific has a very important part of its economy dependent on services, and services in general are increasingly deliverable or facilitated through digital means. We want to have official statistics on e-commerce, not only on the enabling environment, but on who is conducting e-commerce, where is it, where are they conducting e-commerce, to where are they selling, or where are they buying from, and how they are doing it, which applications, which software, which infrastructure is needed. It's also useful to have information on barriers to the digital economy, although this is as much qualitative as quantitative information. And also we want to know what is the participation of women in the digital economy in the interest of the Sustainable Development Goal of towards gender equality. I repeat the question, where do we want to go? We want to have cross-border data flows that work for the benefit of people on the planet. We want Pacific countries that have the capacity to convert raw data into digital intelligence. We want to reduce that data and digital divide. We want the statistics that are produced by the Pacific to be timely, to be regular, to be relevant, and to be international comparable to allow for benchmarking. And finally, that digital economy, final but not last in importance, that digital economy policy is supported by robust statistics, but I want to mention that this is a virtuous circle. So statistics is also supported by policymakers insofar as they assign a mandate and resources for statisticians to do their work properly. So now that we know where we want to go, how do we get there? How can policymakers ensure inclusive access to the benefits of the data and the digital economy? Well, there have to be public policies at the national level for data and data flows. There has to be an acknowledgement. Well, here it's in terms of international trade agreements. We are increasingly including data flows and e-commerce in these agreements, but also at the regional level. And I think the Pacific Digital Economy Program already recognizes that. So we have to continue developing the frameworks, the legal or regulatory frameworks for data flows, but in a way that take into account the possible benefits for everyone. And finally, at the international level, the Digital Economy Report proposes that the United Nations should play a key role in that, that there should be a new global institutional framework, that it should be multi-stakeholder and multidisciplinary. And finally, the last piece of the puzzle, as we know, we need to have international solidarity and our development partners to continue supporting overall the development of the digital economy, but within that, realize that data governance and the production of official statistics is extremely important to support the advancement of digital economy policies. And then finally, we need to have further research and further experiences in terms of what we should measure, how we should measure, what we define to measure, and what we do with that measurement. To summarize, how do we get where we want to be? An international data governance framework and national data strategies involve the national statistical offices in setting benchmarks and indicators for digital and data policy planning and monitoring. So that's partly why we are starting this course next week, so that they have the basic skills and the knowledge to liaise with the digital economy policymakers and come up with indicators that will help them in the implementation of these policies. We have to strengthen the national statistical systems by building skills, by funding surveys and research, by making these digital economy statistics part of regular statistical production, not just an experiment, a one-off. We have to make sure that they are regularly supported and reviewed, and that the national statisticians are able to participate in international discussions for setting standards to measure the digital economy. And this is where regional and international cooperation comes, and support from donors to enable national statistical officers to participate in these discussions is always welcome. Also, further research, as I mentioned, is necessary and development of methodologies. And I take the opportunity for my last comment to tell national statisticians in this audience that the UNCTAD has a working group on measuring e-commerce and the digital economy, where experts meet to discuss emerging trends and progress in e-commerce and digital economy measurement in different parts of the world by regional organizations, but also by other countries. So I encourage you to save the date for 28 to 29 November. And if you cannot come physically to Geneva, we will have a hybrid session, and you will be able to participate remotely. And you can find out all of that we have and all our technical documentation and resources available in the web page that appears at the bottom of this slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scarlett. Scarlett, we've had a question in the chat about the value of social media data in promoting the digital economy. I'll ask you to answer that in the chat as we go into a short 5-minute break before we come back with our next 3 speakers. The Talanoa will resume after this video I'm just about to play for you that features music and dance from the Cook Islands. Have a coffee and we'll be back in just a moment.
Oh
Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that nearly 5-minute Pacific break. If you did enjoy it, head to the Pacific Community YouTube page where there are Pacific breaks from around the region. We'll continue with our Talanoa now. We've got 3 more speakers for you this morning. Next up is Hamish Grant, and Hamish is the Principal Analyst in National Accounts at Statistics New Zealand. And he's been exploring and providing advice on different approaches to measuring the digital economy in New Zealand, as well as being a member of the OEC Task Force on measuring GDP in a digitalised world. I'll hand over to you, Hamish. Welcome.
Cool. Thanks, David. Just trying to share this. You guys see that presentation? Is that presentation coming through?
It is, Hamish. Yeah, I can see it.
Cool. Thanks for that. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, especially warm welcome to those from the other side of the world. I know it's yeah, challenging being different time zones. So appreciate the to join us. So yes, as I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit from a, I guess, a slightly different perspective, from a National Statistics Office perspective around thinking about the digital economy and the challenges and how you might measure that, and I'll sort of talk about New Zealand's journey so far, and it's still a work in progress as we're going. So there's sort of 3 parts to this. So there's a digital strategy for New Zealand. So this is sort of thinking about the policy aims. So I think you'll find there's quite a bit of overlap in themes from the previous discussions and presentations through this, but talk about sort of the framework, about how you kind of bring measures together and integrate measures, and what we've kind of considered there, and then a bit around sort of the options that we've considered to improve visibility in data. And I've included sort of some questions at the end of each slide, sort of to prompt sort of discussion and things to think about, and I'll repeat those questions at the end. So yeah, feel free to have a think about those, and then yeah, see if you've got any questions around those at the end. So the first thing's around what we've called digital strategy Aotearoa, or the strategy for New Zealand. So a national strategy for key things that are important or considered important for New Zealand and digital. And this is an across government, a national government or federal government kind of level, and it's trying to integrate and coordinate what are the needs for information and what are the drivers underlying that. So it's really helping focus from a national statistical agency point of view, focus on what are the most important measures that we should be trying to reflect, and linking that through to the outcomes and all of the policy goals from that. So there are three pillars and these boxes on the right. So there's trust, inclusion, and growth. Trust is really about making sure that people have the confidence that they can use the digital skills in a safe and secure way. So you don't have all your information stolen, or money lost through credit card transactions, or and also extending to, people are safe online. They know they can use social media in a safe way, and so on. Inclusion is really thinking about its link to this digital divide. So making sure from a national context, thinking about the people, the variety of people within a country within New Zealand in this case, have the ability to use use digital tools. They have the skills and capability, they have the access to the right connections and options and thinking about it. And I should say, underlying this is sort of a set of, for each one of these pillars is a set of measures to think about. So probably going to concentrate mostly on the growth measure because that's the one I'm kind of most directly involved in, but can answer questions about some of the others if wanted. So growth, it's really thinking about digital economy. It's thinking in particular New Zealand, how can businesses lift their productivity by using these digital tools? There's also probably a fair degree of, and similarly with, I think, across the Pacific, thinking about New Zealand is a long way away from the rest of the world and big markets of people and populations, and how can we use digital to, you know, provide services, exports of services to the rest of the world in a much cheaper way. And so there's certainly a lot of interest in that digital trade and exports. But I think it's also worth noting that, I'll touch on it later on, there is a lot of services provided into New Zealand from around the world as well. So that understanding.
Hamish, yes. Sorry to interrupt you. Your slides aren't changing. Just pop it into presentation mode so that we can see the slides as you move through them.
Okay. I am currently in presentation mode. Interesting. Let's just try something else. Can you guys see Digital Strategy Aotearoa page?
You've got the PowerPoint desktop view shared, not the presentation screen shared.
Sorry. Okay, what about now?
We can see the digital strategy slide, Hamish.
Okay, cool. And if I move to the next one, you can see digital economy satellite account.
No.
No, it's still the desktop app view, not the presentation view.
Okay. If I try sharing screen.
That's better.
Yeah, and switch. Next one's working okay. Digital economy satellite account.
All good now.
Great. Sorry, apologies about that. Yeah, so these sort of are helping us focus on what are the measures that are most important, and from a National Statistical Agency point of view, how we kind of support that. So I guess one of the questions is, you know, and maybe there's some overlap here, but yeah, so what are some of the policy targets or things that are important for your country, and yeah, is there some overlap there, and what kind of things are important that are coming through? So in terms of framework, I guess we've got this digital satellite account framework, which has sort of been discussed as part of originally as part of this task force group that I'm on, but also sort of the update to the System of National Accounts standards. And I guess I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but it's just a way of thinking about integrating the measures, because it's quite hard to think about the digital economy and what all the different aspects of it are. And certainly you find from a statistical view versus a policy point of view, there's sort of needs a framework to kind of bringing those things together. So this in particular for us allows comparisons with GDP. It's coherent with the digital trade, measuring digital trade kind of manuals, and, you know, directly into the e-commerce thing. So there's a lot of benefits from our point of view of considering an approach. And it is a supply use table. kind of approach. And I know that's not something that, you know, every country has. And I think probably just to alleviate concerns around that, while we're thinking about this approach on framework, we're not actually using the digital, we're not actually using the supply use table elements of this. So to do a full approach requires a lot of information, a lot of surveying, a lot of extra information, and that's not something we can go down that path at the moment. So what we're looking at is, while still using that framework, trying to target the areas of specific interest in New Zealand, and also link to that potentially areas that where there might be data available that we could cover off without having to run a big full program of work. So there's these sort of digital industries on the right, and I guess in New Zealand, so digitally enabling at the top is sort of your ICT equivalent, so telecommunications, computer design services, software support, etc., cloud-based infrastructure provision, so on. Maybe just because I'm going to mention about later. So digital intermediary platforms is your things like something like Airbnb. You might be in New Zealand. There's a number of domestic equivalents as well, but they're linking up providers of services with often households, but could be business as well. And they also they're really only charging a commission as you kind of go, but there's some important, I mention them because it's one of the ones we've sort of been exploring a bit in terms of potential data sources as well. Some of the other ones in the middle, or if we're thinking about things around exports, then this one at the bottom, other producers only operating digitally. So quite a lot of the other ones providing digital services or providing services digitally. A lot of interest in that in New Zealand. So for example, we have fitness workouts and things that might have been done traditionally in person sort of being provided and sold and licensed internationally, and education kind of being provided virtually as well. So certainly a lot of interest in how that's happening and what kind of benefits there might be for countries, or to New Zealand in this case. So yeah, are there any of those industries on the right important to your country? Some are more important in New Zealand than others. So lots of platforms are actually, as was mentioned in the previous presentation, sort of big international players who dominate the market possibly. So there might be more about importing of services into countries rather than exports. But, and in terms of making visible some of these aspects of the digital economy, so it's about wanting to understand its size, importance, and the growth over time. What is it actually contributing to the New Zealand economy? How is it changing? How is it affecting how the economy operates as well? So I think a challenge that many countries face is, you know, there's always more demand for statistics than there are actually resources. Surveying is costly. In New Zealand's case, we're looking to, there's certainly demand for measures for digital economy measures and indicators. Getting resources to fund those is always, you know, to fund new things is always a challenge. So we've been exploring sort of what other opportunities might exist. And I guess one of the key points here is around that the digitalization of activity, as mentioned in the previous presentation, you know, there's a lot of data that is generated through those processes and a lot of interest in that data and potentially a lot of value that can be created from that data, one for the business. But I think if we're thinking in a wider sense, you know, for statistical or wider public well-being, there is a lot of potential to use that data for other purposes. And in this case, we've been trying to explore can we get access to some of that information to create some statistical measures and insights into what's happening in particular spaces. So I've got 4 examples there. Maybe I only talk about a couple of them at a time, but The first one sort of around accommodation, so and accommodation sharing. So we talk about people renting out a room in their house, or renting out their house occasionally, or using a platform like Airbnb to facilitate that and get access to wider markets and sort of an international visitors as well. So we've worked with some of those platforms to get access to that information. There's some international players, there's some domestic players, and we also use some public data that was available to come up with experimental estimates on the size of this activity in New Zealand. There's always more things you would like to do with that, and that's why it's still experimental. But it's sort of, I guess the value of this is thinking about, are there alternative ways of getting that information? So we're going to a limited number of platforms to get information on what are hundreds of thousands of people providing accommodation services in New Zealand, and getting that in an aggregate way. So it sort of gets around some of your issues around, are people concerned about their individual information being provided, but it is held by these private companies. And able to come up with an estimate for that, which would be very costly to try and collect via survey or some sort of other alternative approach. So we're able to do some things around that. And probably the other one I'd mentioned, which we're still working through, is this third one around activity of digital businesses. And we're sort of exploring a few different approaches, and I know many other countries are as well, around ways of identifying businesses and then matching that to, your statistical business register, so you can link to existing information that's already there. And so in New Zealand, there's a number of specific industry groups that have lists of businesses, and we're able to match those with our business register, although not perfectly matched. There are some challenges there. And I think somewhere I saw, people looking at, web scraping, and we have explored a little bit of that, but you're sort of web scraping whether activities might be involved in e-commerce or things. There's some good international examples of activity done there, but it's a sort of, I guess, highlighting these alternative kind of ways that you might be able to consider, covering some of these aspects. And there are challenges, but yeah, it's something that can be done as well. So I guess the question is, are there other alternatives that might be available in your country that are outside of these lists, or other things to consider? And I think a few were mentioned a little bit earlier in some of the presentations. So, just probably in conclusion to wrap up there. So New Zealand's on a bit of a journey. It's not complete. It's not. It's going to continue to evolve, and there's a lot more that we would like to do or could do. But I think it sort of gives an idea on how you might think about starting into some of this. The strategy is really helpful. So as mentioned in other presentations, it's not just a statistical agency coming up and saying we should do this. If you can work with your policy, you can work policy agencies and the wider use and get support for those things. It's very important and very helpful, and really allows you to kind of focus on what's important and the key things. Conceptual framework, just thinking about how the information might be used and what are the kind of key things you want to cover, and there's some international frameworks you can think about. And but in terms of measurement, it is a challenging new area, but digitalization does provide more data sources available to us, or potentially available to us. And it's, there's some opportunities there. That's probably the key thing I want to say. So, those are the questions there again, just to remind you. But I'll finish up there and get back to David. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hamish. We've got a fairly active conversation happening in the chat, and there's a question for you in there that I'll encourage you to answer in the chat if you would. Just asking about a timeline for the digital economy satellite account. Thanks again, and we'll move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Linda Follier, and she's the Manager for Financial Inclusion at the Central Bank of the Solomon Islands. Linda has assisted in the development and implementation of two of the most recent Solomon Islands national financial inclusion strategies, and in the development of the National Women's Financial Inclusion Policy. Linda says in her role, she's charting a journey towards an inclusive financial sector embracing the Sustainable Development Goals. Welcome, Linda, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, David. So I'll just get my slide screen on. I think my slide screen is there.
Yeah, I can see it, Linda.
Okay, I'll see how I'll go about this screen. Hopefully I can go through that and not having problems with the screen. Good morning from our side, and to our participants as well joining us. So the presentation is more a country perspective on the financial inclusion initiatives within the region and also in Solomon Islands and its contribution to the digital economy, and mainly looking at the focus on the population access and usage of these digital services that promises to improve people's livelihood in this growing digital economy. So firstly, has my second slide screen come on, David?
Yeah, we can see your slide, Linda.
Two. Okay. So
Linda, we see your presenter view. If you click on display settings at the top, you can switch between the presentation and presenter view. The display settings drop down arrow at the top. Next and to the right of that. It's fine anyway. Linda, we can see the slides. That's okay. You can continue. Sorry for interrupting.
So firstly, a glance on Solomon Islands socio-economic, financial, and the landscaping and development on the digital economy based on the IDES score as at end of 2020. So Solomon Islands, I think that has been highlighted in the region. For Solomon Islands, we are known for our geographical scatteredness and population sparsely distributed over small remote islands. And that is where the emphasis on the financial inclusion strategy 3 is based, that they've seen that role of DFS could facilitate the connectedness between these islands. Of course, that has to be facilitated by policies, enabling policies, innovative partnerships, and improved infrastructure. So the recent census have shown population at 720,000, and market is a small market, cash dominated. And therefore, this is where the challenges lie. Also, the financial system is quite small with very few regulated institutions in the country that has been listed there. In terms of, I have also highlighted our mobile network operators. This is where, if we are looking towards the digital initiatives, these are two also important players in our market. We have two mobile network operators, and for Solomon Islands, the network coverage for these two is almost 96%. However, when we look into the mobile penetration in terms of the population is only around 59%, and looking at 3G, 4G is 18.5%. So at this landscape, we could almost see what would be the challenges that lie ahead in terms of digital economy. In the latest IDE score 2020, the digital economy score for Solomon Islands stood at 39%, indicating that the country's development of digital economy is very much at its nascent stage. Here, it is highlighted that though we have connected to the undersea fiber optic cable in 2019, we still face challenges in terms of delivering the benefits of potentially transformational infrastructure. So this points to improvements that needs to be made in terms of developing enabling environments, supporting the private sector to expand mass market digital services, and building the communication and financial infrastructure that will assist to build foundations for the innovation sector to thrive on. So I'm looking at the digital inclusive score for the country is at 50%, indicating that there is still room for stakeholders to include marginalized segments. I think this is an area as we move towards digital economy that will lessen digital divide. So we look at the marginalized segments, the rural population, the youth, the MSMEs, etc. Also, for our gender inclusiveness is quite high. That is mainly because of more focus by government and stakeholders in this area. So the key with the inclusive score is while efforts towards a digital economy, an emphasis is required on marginalized segments to ensure, as I've highlighted earlier, that digital divide is lessened as we focus on digital economy. I'm going on to my third slide. So the country's national financial inclusion strategy has been the roadmap on the efforts of Solomon Islanders having access to a range of quality and affordable financial services and be competent to use them purposely to increase their resilience and improve their livelihood in this growing as we focus more on digital economy. So in the region also, we have the Pacific Island Regional Initiative where most have a financial inclusion strategy that identifies initiatives and priorities in fostering digital transformation, and also efforts around data and measurement framework. So in our strategy, Objective 6 is where we try to, how can we improve our data and measurement framework in order to measure these initiatives, including e-commerce or digital economy. So some of the initiatives that are in place, we're still to have a national payment system. So that is still an ongoing. Of course, these initiatives are supported by development partners. The e-tax, this is with the government, trying to promote digitization within the government. USaveLo Mobile is for the informal sector saving to superannuation fund through mobile airtime credit. The bulk shop digital marketplace is mainly the online shopping, which is our first, which we have trialed. Of course, there are challenges since our national payment system is still to be in place. And we are just now looking into the mobile money. And of course, on the policy, we are looking at some of these policy to enable that. And just recently, we launched the regulatory sandbox framework as to assist in this enabling environment. And this is a work in line with the Pacific Islands Regional Initiative Sandbox that has been launched earlier. So looking at, so how are these initiatives and the digital economy? So looking at the region where all of us are at our various phases of our digital transformation, maybe most in the early stages of their development. And for Solomon Islands, as I've highlighted earlier, our ADES score is 39% and we are at our startup stage. So in this early development phase of the digital economy, the focus is on strengthening the enabling environment through policy and framework, while having the framework that will foster this kind of initiatives and e-commerce, also proportionate regulations that will regulate these initiatives. Infrastructure, I think this is, I can see from the question earlier on in our session, infrastructure is a big one, and that is what is also highlighted here. Looking at the payment ecosystem, do we have the digital rails that will support innovative solution for e-commerce, for digital economy, all these digital initiatives? And also in terms of our payment platforms, are these open, interoperable? These are areas that the focus really needs to look at and strengthen these areas. Of course, around this is the data that comes in, and how do we measure this progress in these areas? So data, of course, is an important area within doing these initiatives, driving the economy towards digital, and also the data that will assist to provide that informed decision. So when looking at some of the areas that needs to focus on as we go towards a digital economy, again, the infrastructure is highlighted. ID infrastructure, I know in terms of DFS and innovation, this is one of area that needs to be really looked into. Is it digital ID or is the national ID we are using in this case? Connectivity, yes, connectivity, but to the last mile. Has this connectivity will be reaching the last mile in the rural, out in the remote islands? In terms of the payment ecosystem, as I've highlighted earlier on, in terms of its accessibility, used by, they can be accessed and used by users, and then they're interoperable so that in the remote rural areas, there can be users able to use whichever financial service providers services out in the rural, rather than having a sort of each provider have their own service and their own machine for users to use it, this kind of system. And also the innovation system, what kind of supporting infrastructure, the innovation skills, research and development, these will be area that needs to look into to support digital economy. Policy and regulation, as I've highlighted earlier, and the laws that will support that, and also the skills development, digital literacy, and that. So highlighting some of the key priorities or initiatives by the government. So the government is currently having this national digital strategy and establish a digital transformation authority under the government to prioritize implementation of this digital economy initiatives. And also there is the development of national e-commerce strategies spearheaded by the government, Ministry of Communication, and supported by UNCTAD for this e-commerce strategy. So this strategy should foster public-private sector partnership to drive e-commerce and work on areas that will enable meaningful participation in the digital economy. And for central bank, it's again come back to the private sector on the National Financial Inclusion Strategy 3 that is in place on the areas that we are looking at in terms of digital initiatives. So finally, on this slide, looking at data, the IDEA score that was recently put out for Solomon Islands has highlighted the significance of data and robust analysis as the catalyst to inform decision-making and to develop policies for promoting and accelerating broader digital transformation. So under the objective 6 of the strategy, this is an area that we have put out on data and measurement framework, but from the session, I could see there is more to this. Currently, data limitations in e-commerce and digital economy is something that we will need to really work on. Also, the experience with key ministries holding data, key government ministries that are having data like Home Affairs and voting, electoral, the databases in Siloid. So if we are to work towards a digital economy, we have to have some kind of harmonization between data. So this is sort of taking us a step back into looking at what needs to be prepared or sorted within the domestic level or the national level in terms of data. So one is that there are privacy protocols around data sharing, and therefore these areas will really need to be looked into, and how do we harmonize so that we can have a centralized data in country, so that we are able to also be able to report to data centers outside of the country. Also robust data infrastructures, how compatible data infrastructure for policy decision-making. Areas like, is the databases that we are having existing, is it user-friendly in terms of able to accommodate, capture new data, accommodate new policy needs or new data required from us in country, rather than forming new databases every time when we want to have new data or capture new information. These are the areas that I would like to highlight here. And also data centers in country that addresses this Siloid issue. So, and finally on the raw data, in country, how aligned is the reporting in country? I think that alignment needs to be in place, the data and measurement framework in country and the data and measurement framework outside that requires in-country information to be reported outside. It needs review within in-country data, and then capacity building so that information that is in country is adequate and is already adequate for reporting outside of the country. So yeah, these areas that is highlighted under the country perspective. So I think this is my final slide on data and where we need to really work on in country in order to be able to furnish that kind of information outside of the country as is required to measure progress. So I'm sure with the development of the e-commerce strategy that area around data and measurement framework will be part of it to ensure that what is required to be evaluated and monitored and reported to our stakeholders outside the country. So I think that's my final statement. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you so much, Linda, for your presentation. In the interest of time, if anyone has any questions, and there's some comments in the chat for you, Linda, we will move the questions to the chat in the interest of time. We may go a few minutes over time, so we hope that you can stay with us. Our next speaker is from the private sector and is kindly joining us today. Viraj Kantalao-Lad is the CEO and Executive Director of Bikabai Fiji, who entered the e-commerce space during the COVID-19 pandemic. Over to you, Viraj.
Thank you, David. Bula Vinaka, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see my slides. Yeah, okay.
Loud and clear. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm going to give our private sector perspective, and I hope you find it interesting, especially for policymakers and people into data collection. So here's a table of contents. I'm going to talk about our business and how we got techie, what we learned through the process, the challenges, the opportunities, and some questions for you guys at the end. So just a quick one. Our business name is Bikabai & Company, and we're based in Bar, Fiji. The pictures you can see are very old. They are black and white, of course, and I'm going to tell you more about our family-owned business. So we manufacture Indian sweets. So on the pictures, you can see the Indian sweets over there. And we've been in Fiji for more than 92 years. We're a family-owned and operated business. I'm one of the family members working in the family business. And currently in Fiji, we've got 5 retail shops and 1 is opening late this year. As a group, we employ about 100 employees, and currently we do export as business to consumer using e-commerce and also business to business on special events. Okay, so this is where the core part of this whole thing is when we got techie. So our brand name Bikabai, as I mentioned, is well established for over 9 decades. And our motivation to go online was only because we've got a lot of ex-Fijians living in Australia, New Zealand, US, who still recognize our brand and want to be part of it because it means home for them. So we have had a lot of customers who, when they visit Fiji, they come to our shops and buy the sweets to take back with them. And it's as a gift for someone or for their own consumption. And personally, growing up here in Fiji, and as most of the family-owned businesses, we've had to work in the shop from a young age while going to school. And personally, I've seen that there was a lot of people taking our sweets. One of the key beauty of our product is we have not changed the way we make it. We still keep it in its natural form. So that means that we do not use any preservatives. So our products are perishable. And it was a challenge to export into another country. We could not just pack it and just send it and expect the life of the product to be a lot more days. And heat was a big component in ensuring that our products are safe. More heat for dairy products only means it's going to go bad very quickly. So e-commerce was our answer, and we worked with the logistics partner like DHL Express, and we found them to be the fastest and the best people in delivering a product. At every step, when our products are packed here in Fiji and given to DHL, we track it online as to where it's progressing from us to the airport, Fiji airport, from our airport to another port, and we monitor it every line. We get notifications by email. So this helps solve our problem to make sure that our products reach our customers within the travel time, maximum 10 to 12 days. In the Pacific side, obviously the temperatures are more. So our market is in areas where it's a lot cooler. So sometimes we do extend to 15 days and the products are good. So we launched our e-commerce website on 25th of March, 2021. And this is just before the Fiji second lockdown. And the timing could not be any better. On your right-hand side, you can see a graph This is an average order size by country, and this excludes shipment. You'll see New Zealand, Australia, US, and then there's gift in Fiji. So gift in Fiji basically means people who are living overseas and wish to order something for their family or friends. If there's a wedding, engagement, or party, or anything of that sort. And all the other countries, just to give you a snapshot, we've had people order from Cook Islands, from Solomon Islands, and these are people living who have grown up in Fiji and now working in all these countries, to the extent of Dubai as well. And then we have people locally ordering for themselves. Some of the learnings. So for us, we started small. We wanted to learn our customers' choices and what they wanted. How we packed at the shop level and what's in the website were two different ball games, I'd say. So we had a brochure website in 2015, and the idea was to create awareness that our products, what products we have. Then in 2016, we added our products with prices on it. We had to rework as to how we're going to package it. In Fiji, we sell our products by weight, like how you probably buy onion and potatoes. And we're the only traders who sell by weight. The others sell by the number of pieces. So when it came to website, we had to make sure one product had defined number of pieces. We had to work on an average weight because it impacts our courier charges. And we also added a manual credit card payment system, which did not perform as well because customers were reluctant to share the credit card details and ID with us through email, which is an after process once the order is placed online, but the payment has not come through. So in 2017, we decided to go full e-commerce, and that was ready by 2019. However, we could not get into our payment gateway as quickly because of the challenges we've had, and I'm going to share more on that. So we were new to this business and we wanted to understand our customers' wishes. So we added a live chat feature on our website, and it helped us to know what other products and services our customers wanted, what were they interested in. Or we simply helped our customers to navigate our website. If you go to our website, it's in a website that is 3 or 4 years old. Currently, we are revamping our website to make it more user-friendly for customers to make their purchases. So we started small and learned how we can best serve our customers. It did take us time, and there were no shortcuts. We're very passionate about what we sell, and we're very proud of it, especially the family legacy that we want to keep and maintain and grow. You can see on the picture over there, we've got a product called Ginger Burfi. Burfi is really like a toffee or something as you would like, and is made using Fiji's ginger. So in our products, we've also incorporated local products, and we support local farmers. Challenges. So one of the key things, obviously, is the banks and the amount of deposits that is required for us to open a payment gateway. There's a whole lot of paperwork that you have to go through, compliance, some IT stuff that we even don't know. So we have to use our website developers to help us with that. And just to give an idea, we've had to double the amount of expected transactions. So if we expected, say, $2,000 Fijian worth of transaction in a month, we'd have to put a $4,000 deposit with the bank. And I've shared some of this experiences with United Nations Development Program, and there's an article, and I'll put a link at the bottom, and you can look it up. So there's a lot more on that. For us here in Fiji, the Fijian government is now lobbying with the banks to improve digital platform. And again, there's a local news at the bottom where the Attorney General has highlighted that the bank's participation in digital platform is low. Prior to COVID, we've had Vodafone Fiji launch Viticard. Is basically an online portal where many businesses can come together and sell online. That took a real hike during COVID, like many other countries. And that's definitely a great initiative by the local companies here. The other big challenge that we found was the shipping charges from Pacific Island countries. It's really high. In some countries, you could get items from US or from China or other countries for a very low courier charges. In Fiji, we've from the data that we've collected, we noted that 55% of the value of the goods was actually shipping charges overseas. So if you had $100 worth of goods that you purchased from us, the expected courier charge would probably be $55. But because we've got a strong brand name, people want our product for an event, they do buy it, and we're very proud of that. So that's one area that really is sort of not helping us grow because of the cost of shipping. And now with the cost of food prices going up everywhere due to the war, the fuel prices going up, it's not making it any easier for us to ship outside of Fiji. So I put some links, like I mentioned earlier. You can look it up later when these slides are shared. So opportunities, you can see from the graph on the top right-hand side corner, we've had sales prior to e-commerce and e-commerce, and there's a big jump, obviously. And we've had most orders coming in for gift in Fiji. On a single month, we've had a record of over 220 orders in a single month. And this is one of the Hindu festivals for Raksha Bandhan, which is coming up in August again. And these are sisters who are overseas. They tie a knot on a brother's hand, and they also give sweets. So sisters who could not make it to Fiji during that event, they gifted it. And we had the sweets, of course, but we also packaged it with Raksha Bandhan, which is that band that I'm talking about. So we noticed that over 50% of our sales was derived from overseas customers buying for their family in Fiji or local consumption. And that meant foreign income for Fiji. And that's evident in the graph that the number of orders we've had gift in Fiji, you can see over here as I'm pointing through my mouse. And knowing that our shipping charges were high, last year we partnered with a Fijian business based in New Zealand as a distributor. And we send our sweets by air freight. Last year, October, during Diwali, we sent 3.2 tons of our products to New Zealand. And this year during Eid, we sent 1.2 tons. We've had learnings from that, and we are growing, and we're very excited about that opportunity to grow in that market. So this is really towards my end of my slide. And this is something for everyone to think about. What product do you miss the most when you are out of your home country? You have demand because you miss it, but there's no supply. And are there products unique to your country that can turn into a solid brand name, which can be an opportunity? Do Pacific Island businesses have access to technical and affordable expertise to design a website? And I suppose the other presenters have also discussed about this. And from a private perspective, this is really an area we could afford it, given the scale of our business and the expertise we've had in-house and the people. But I do think of other countries. It's not cheap. It is getting cheaper now. But those are few things that you can create an opportunity from, because there's something unique to your country, and you do have people living from your country outside in Australia, New Zealand, US, or wherever it may be, And that really creates a lot of e-commerce transactions. I have a picture of our website showing 3 different pack sizes: value, family, and corporate packs, number of pieces, and the price. And this is coconut burfi, and that's made using Fiji's organic desiccated coconut, and we source it from an NGO, and it also helps in poverty elevation. Sorry. And that's it from me. There's a picture of our products sold at Pack and Save in New Zealand during Eid this year, and there's our first entry, and we're very proud of that. Yeah, that's all I have for everyone. Thanks, back to you, David.
Thanks so much for that, Viraj. There's a couple of questions in the chat for you that I'll ask you to answer in the chat, if you would, related to customs and health barriers for raw materials and the primary source of your data to grow your business. Thanks again.
Thank you.
To wrap up our Talanoa this morning or this evening, I'd like to introduce Jose Villa, who's a consultant with UNCTAD on statistics and development. Over to you, Jose.
Thank you, David, for the introduction and also for the opportunity to share this webinar with you. Well, basically, I could only attend a part of the presentation, so I don't have a complete feeling about what is during the webinar. But basically, I think that the presentations I have the chance to see highlight something that is quite relevant in the topic that we are discussing, is that is the role that data play in digital economy, and how important really is to have a good measurement about how digital economy is working, e-commerce is working, etc. For instance, in the last presentation that we have the chance to see about the private sector, we could see how this information is useful, for instance, to compare the shipping costs, and to have really a clear idea what could be the strong and the weak points of a business, and really to design the business strategy. Also, in the previous presentations, we could see how having this information is quite relevant, not only to promote digital economy and e-commerce, but promote it in a fair way that is going to close the digital divide and is going to help to poverty alleviation, and really for in our case, in the integration of some of the countries that we have in the Pacific area that are in general quite isolated. So really, this information is very useful to support the creation of policies, the creation of business, the creation of strategies that really can help to increase the economy and to support poverty alleviation. So we also had the chance to see in the presentations that this measurement of the digital economy is really a big challenge, since really data are quite dispersed, quite sparse, not homogeneous, etc. But on the other hand, the very core characteristics of digital economy that are based on data sharing, and data really the fuel of this new economy, opens a lot of very, very nice opportunities to measure what is going on in very different ways, and really to create methods to collect data, to analyze data, to share this data that can really improve a lot the current situation. At this point, we also highlight the importance of doing these things in a harmonized way. It's important that all the countries, all the NSOs work in an homogeneous way. And in this part, I think that the manual that UNCTAD has produced to measure the digital economy, a manual that Jose Luis Cervera and myself are the authors of the new revision, of the new version that we have, can play in this harmonization of statistics. And really, I encourage everybody attending this webinar to attend also the course that we are going to have, the training activity, in which also the other author of the manual, Jose Luis Cervera, and myself are going to be the main lecturers, where we are going to talk about all these topics, and we are going to have the chance to discuss, to see examples, to see really how this measurement of the digital economy can be improved in the Pacific countries, and also to have some new ideas about how to improve this measurement. So it would really great for me to have the chance to go on this discussion with you during the online training activity that is going to take place since next Monday. So thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this webinar, David.
Thank you so much, Jose. We're nearing to the end of our Talanoa today. Before we do a final wrap up of the Talanoa, I wonder if I could ask everybody who's comfortable to turn their cameras on so that we can take a group photograph of everyone that joined us today.
David, I think only panelists and speakers have video. But we can take a shot of speakers, I guess.
Smile, everybody. Thank you. Got it. Look, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'd like to thank our partners and speakers from UNCTAD, PIFS, Stats New Zealand, Bikabai, and the Central Bank of the Solomon Islands. And we hope you found the presentations enlightening and interesting. And if we'd look forward to seeing you at the next Pacific Data Hub Community of Practice Talanoa. To keep in touch with the activities of the Community of Practice and the Pacific Data Hub, please subscribe to the Pacific Data Hub newsletter. I'll pop a link to that in the chat. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your days or your evenings.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.